Check in. Has Mr. Taylor joined us yet? Okay. Jenny, I think let's go ahead and get started. If you'll let me know when it's.
Looks like it's already recording, Laura.
It's recording. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's Our Community Stories featuring Brookstown. This is brought to you by the City of Durham's Neighborhood Improvement Services Department and the community engagement team as a part of our equitable community engagement work. Understanding history and the history of our neighborhoods is important to creating a better future together. You want to learn more? DurhamCommunityEngagement.org. Also, this is the 7th in our series of Our Community Stories, and you can see all of our recordings on the City of Durham's YouTube page. Also, they play from time to time on the Durham television network. For most people, that will probably be channel 8. And so far, we featured Walltown, Weston, Ragtown, Crest Street, and Haytime. Today's speakers are listed, but this is where I'm turning it over to our moderator, Dr. Johnson from NCCU, which we are so honored to have. As I said earlier, one of our speakers may have not made it on the call yet, so they may be joining us later, but I will turn it over to you now, Dr. Johnson.
Laura, thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm Charles Denton Johnson, the Director of the Public History Program at North Carolina Central University. I'm honored to have this opportunity to be the moderator for this afternoon's panel on the Brookstown community, an African-American community which grew up west of the city limits of Durham beginning in the 1870s and 1880s, and whose residents played such an important part in the history of Durham. I'd like to thank the staff of the Neighborhood Improvement Services for the City of Durham for organizing this event, with special thanks to Constance Stansel, Cheryl McDonald, and Laura Bittiger. For our program this afternoon, we have with us 4 panelists. I believe one is on the way, all of whom either grew up in Brookstown or have family ties to the Brookstown community. They are in alphabetical order by last name: Joshua Gunn, Barbara Lassiter, Cora Mcfadden, and Boyd Taylor. We'll have a chance to hear from them in just a moment. I believe that we have a presentation that we're going to move to. It's important as we begin our discussion to get some sense of the area of Durham that we're talking about. I know that we have a lot of new residents who have moved to Durham recently, and Durham itself is downtown Durham sits on a ridge line. In fact, Main Street, West Main Street, divides almost the basins of the Cape Fear and the Neuse Rivers. But just west of the city is the area that we're talking about. And here you can see a photograph of an aerial photo that shows Brookstown at the very bottom center of that image. So where you see the West Pettigrew just to the right of that. Thank you so much, Laura. And if we could advance a slide. Here is a 1914 map of the area that we're talking about. And we want to center in on Thackston Avenue, which was part of the heart of the Brookstown community. So if we can kind of highlight that Thackston area and just kind of go over it so people can see the area that we're talking about. But Thackston, there you go. And then if you go to the right of that, you'll see Farrell Street. Exactly. And coming down also, there's Farrell. Right. And Thackston went up to, on this map, it's listed as Allen, but it was later Post Street and Swift. And next slide. This is an aerial photo of the Brookstown community from 1955. we'll have an opportunity to talk for a moment about what ends up happening with the Brookstown community with the construction of what was initially called the Southern Crosstown Thoroughfare, but what I knew growing up here in Durham as the East-West Highway and is today 147. But you can see the Brookstown community here, and Thackston Avenue is running parallel to, yep, that old tobacco barn, and that's Thackston, exactly. And Farrell was right next to that tobacco warehouse, exactly. And then if we go further up, you can identify Poe and Swift, exactly. Exactly. And that's what that looked like at that time. And you can see the entire community. I think I can see West Durham Baptist Church there. And also the Mount Olive AME Zion Church located, West Durham is located almost on the center on Thackston, I believe. So if you come down, yeah, it's just below that. You'll see kind of a large building. We're in that general area. Sorry, next slide. This is what that area looks like today. You can see it doesn't look much like it did when it was a thriving community that supported many families here in Durham and Black Durham. And you can see where 147 now cuts right through that area, and Thackston actually is no longer exists. It would have run almost where I guess that's the eastbound lane of 147. Yeah, on that side, it would have run almost where that is. That's where Thackston would have been. So they put that highway right through the heart of the Brookstown community. As it cut through also Hayti, the Bottoms, and then west of the Brookstown community, it also cut through Hickstown. Next slide. That is an aerial photo that kind of shows the surrounding community, and you will see at the bottom of the screen where the highway is kind of coming into the community on the regular map, and come down now. Just come straight down. There you go. And that's the highway today, and it cuts right through and goes right up Thackston. There you go, and on. And we'll continue. This is a map of the area in 1966, so we can get a clear view of the community here, and the streets are named as they were just before they cut the East-West Highway through the community. But very important streets to that community are again, Thackston. On this map, it has Maxwell, but at the time, if you go back, it was Farrell Street, and then Gaddis, and also Poe and Faber and Page and Caswell. Next slide. And we just overlaid that on today so that we can get some sense of what that looks like. And again, this community is just west of the city limits of Durham, and it was raised, that community and the others that I mentioned previously during the urban renewal process, which began in the discussion in the 1950s, and it gained momentum in the early 1960s, and then it went into effect in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Next slide. This is an aerial view, so now we can see, you can see the area that is Brookstown off to the west of the city center of downtown Durham. And next slide. And that is another aerial view that gives a close-up, sort of at an angle with the highway Again, that highway cut right through the heart of the Brookstown community. For those of you all who are interested in studying and learning more about this process of urban renewal, there's a great book by an author by the name of Mindy Fullilove that looks at the impact of urban renewal on African American communities throughout the United States. And she estimated in that book that some 80% of African American communities were deleteriously impacted by urban renewal. And it has left a deep emotional scar across this country in Black communities. And we all share in that. And you will have an opportunity to hear from residents from the Brookstown community talk about that. Next slide. And now we're at Thackston Avenue, and I want to open this up and make sure that we get our panelists so that they can have an opportunity to share. But this is an awesome photo of Thackston Avenue with a lovely young lady here. You can see the cars lining the street here. Does anybody want to join us? Jump in. When you do, just introduce yourself, and you can kind of speak to this particular slide if you would. Cora, do you recognize this?
This is Barbara Lassiter.
Okay, sure, Bob.
I recognize the young lady. She's still living.
Is it Charlene?
This is Jenny Winston.
Gentlemen.
Jenny
Okay.
is living in Vegas at this time. And the house there on the corner, at one time, Joshua, I think your grandparents lived there, and Ann Curtis Utley lived in that particular apartment building, and she is still living at this time.
Okay.
William
And this is Sister Barbara Lassiter, who grew up in the Brookstown community and is still a Durham resident. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen this photo so many times. Unfortunately, there aren't very many photos from Brookstown. And so this is one of our favorites. My pops used to show us this picture all the time just to try to give us some sort of visual of what life in Brookstown was like.
Right.
And Miss Lassiter, you're right. My pops said that his family did live in that sort of that bigger apartment looking building at some point before moving to, I think it was 920 Thackston Avenue, where my actually lived. But I mean, this is like a image of the past, right? It's so cool to see, because unfortunately, by the time I was born, there was not very much Brookstown for us to go back and see. And it was always hard to imagine what life in that community was like. So we love this photo.
So this
Joshua,
Barbara,
would you introduce your dad by name for us?
Sure. Yeah.
Also,
So absolutely. I'm Joshua Gunn. And my father's name is Henry Gunn. And he passed away actually almost a year ago today. So thanks for that, Dr. Johnson. You'll give me a chance to shout my pops out. I'm wearing a bow tie in his honor, and a quick story about why I'm doing that. My dad taught me so many things, as fathers teach sons. And there's only one thing that I ever taught him how to do, and that was to tie a bow tie. So I used to, when I was performing, I went through a period of about 5 years where I performed in bow ties all the time. And my dad always liked the look, and he finally asked me if I would teach him how to wear one or teach him how to tie one. So we spent countless sessions teaching him how to tie one. Some YouTube videos helped as well. And those who attended West Durham Baptist know that for, I guess, probably the last 5 years of his life or so, he always wore a bow tie to church.
yes,
And,
yes, he did.
I was always proud to say I taught him something. So anytime I put on a bow tie, I think of my dad.
That's a great story.
Dr. Johnson, this
Yes,
is Cora.
go ahead.
Cora,
Please.
I was looking at this building, and it reminds me of another lady who lived there. Barbara, you might remember Miss Dora Green, don't you?
I do, but Miss Dora
Is that
Green
the
lived
building?
further down.
She lived
I
further
believe-
down?
Further down, I think.
Where?
Miss Dora Green lived right behind where Lyman Brandon and where my dad used to stay on Thackston, back
I
behind
think it
where
is
next to
here. Okay,
Dottie,
okay.
next to Dottie.
I thought here. I thought it was here. Okay. Yeah, I was sort of little.
Cora,
Yeah, yeah.
so Cora, I'm gonna ask you to introduce, since you've unmiked and begun to share. Will you introduce yourself also, please, since
Yeah,
you're
my
such a treasure of the Durham community?
name. I'm Cora Mcfadden from Brookstown, North Carolina. I always refer to it as Brookstown, North Carolina, where I lived all of my childhood life, and really shaped me to be a good taxpaying citizen. Is that enough, Dr. Johnson?
Who also served as our
Mayor.
Oh, I served as on the city council and as the mayor pro tem for 16 years with Bill Bell when he was mayor. And I have to admit that Brookstown helped to shape my life in so many ways, especially as relates to serving the community and just loving each other. We loved each other in Brookstown. And if all neighborhoods could be like Brookstown was, I mean, we are still Brookstown. We still have Brookstown in our hearts. And we still love each other. And it's just a blessing to be on this call.
Laura, I want to ask you to go back one slide just real quick. I have a quick question I want to ask. So where would this building have been on Thackston Avenue? Can we get some sense of that?
Right, it's really near Gaddis. Well, if you come right up Gaddis, there were two houses on Gaddis, and it was kind of sitting behind those two houses. Once you turn off of Gaddis onto Thackston Avenue.
Okay.
You come up Gaddis, take a right on Thackston. And
Okay.
not far from the church.
How close was that to West Durham Baptist?
Oh, not far. As a matter of fact, you see the houses across the street? There was
Yes.
probably maybe one more house and then the church.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. Okay. That gives some sense of where we're talking about in the Brookstown community.
Right.
Go ahead and advance a slide for us, Laura. Thank you. Okay, this is another community picture from the Thackston Avenue area. And if we can get some comments on this photo here.
I'll be right back.
I have no clue. Some of these things were, pictures were early on in my life. I don't recognize a lot of these folks. Hey, one might be me that I don't recognize.
So that might be you down the end.
Auntie Cora is a young lady, Dr. Johnson. These historic photos are well before her time. So
you know, and our elder spokesman just stepped off for a minute to take care of something.
Yeah, one of the things.
I tell you what.
One comment I can make, Dr. Johnson, is building off of what Auntie Cora said before about how the Brookstown community loved each other and the deep sense of pride that people in Brookstown had. You know, she called it Brookstown, North Carolina, and my dad is smiling hearing that, because I mean, they represented this neighborhood, which wasn't a big neighborhood, right? But there were lives and people and families that grew up there that were so significant, and the pride has always been inspiring for me. The way they love one another, you know, attending West Durham Baptist Church as a kid and going back to visit now, that love still exists. And you know, even though West Durham is not in West Durham anymore, it still represents, in my opinion, the spirit of Brookstown. And you can feel that in that church. But the other point I'd like to make is for folks who are watching this, and you know, we're going to talk about 147 and what it did to this neighborhood. When you hear folks like Cora speak on how much that community meant to her, it's clear that it's not just buildings that were torn down or houses that disappeared, this was the center of the lives of these individuals that was taken away. You know, my pops went away to the Vietnam, served in Vietnam 2 times and spent 20 years in the Air Force living overseas. And by the time he came back, there was nowhere for him to go and no place for his memories to live, no place for them to gather. So, you know, urban renewal did a lot more than just tear down buildings.
Exactly. And that's the important aspect of that, right? Is that the community is embodied in the people who live in it and not just the buildings. And that's what I think oftentimes is lost when people see, especially when they see, they look at homes today in a modern form and they see the older homes that often existed in our communities, including in Brookstown. And they lose sight of the fact that what's really torn up and torn down are the people who lived in those communities.
Yes.
So what we have here is we have a slide of the schools.
Lion Park.
Lion Park.
Yes.
We
So
had
you
one point,
all,
Dr. Johnson. It was 1
yes.
mile from Brooktown to Lion Park.
It seemed like more, but it was only
But we had to walk every day, one way and then walk back.
That's right.
Sister Lassiter, we can't see you now. Talk to us a little bit about that experience and about Lion Park. You know, today you go off to school and today we go off to go to church. But, you know, back in the day, the schools were often right in our communities and the church was right in our community as well. Talk to us a little bit about Lion Park School.
Well, one thing I remember very well about Lion Park, the teachers were a part of West Durham Baptist and the Brookstown community. They will always visit your family. They were there on Sunday a lot of times. But Lion Park was just a wonderful, it was kind of like a family school, even though it was West End, Brookstown, and all around. We had lots of plays. They taught us so many things rather than just teaching us everyday ABCs or whatever. But they made sure you did get your lesson. And I'll never forget Miss Ruby Grissom.
Lord,
she would roll up. And if you did not get that math, count to this day, because she was determined. They all, Rosa Artist, all of those wonderful. Anna Lee Cobb lived right in our neighborhood on Thackston Avenue.
And Miss Mary Louise Stevens.
Right. She lived up on Post Street.
Yeah.
Miss Mary Louise taught music to some of the kids in our neighborhood. I took piano under her for a little while. But it was just a loving, loving neighborhood. The school was just wonderful. All of the principals and teachers were a part of our community.
They were.
Yeah, and Dr. Johnson and Auntie Cora and Miss Lassiter, juxtapose that against the way that we school our children today, and it's drastically different. Think about, you know, the fact that your teachers lived on your block, they knew your parents, they went to your church, your school was closely integrated into your neighborhood. Think about the level of accountability that exists on both sides. The teachers are accountable to you as a student, students are accountable to the teachers. You know, as we talk about urban renewal today, we lost a lot of that too, right? We send our kids now all over the place to go to school, and you know, we could even transition that conversation into how we police our communities. You know, the fact that we don't have those sort of insular neighborhoods anymore is causing lots of challenges, right? And I often, you know, we used to ride with my dad and talk about these stories, and I became a little bit envious of the community that you all had, right? And how we, in my generation, you know, Durham was our whole community, which is great, but Durham is really a city of neighborhoods, and we've lost a bit of that. You know, you may live in one neighborhood, work in another one, go to school in another one, and you're really disconnected from the human beings and the lives of those in the neighborhood. So I often think about the other things that we lost in urban renewal, and that's another one.
And, you know, you had family living together also, right? So you had relatives right on the same block with you. And all of that that served as part of your support system. And we've lost so much of that. But what you're saying is right on point, Joshua. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we had in my dad's home, 920 Thackston Avenue, where they grew up. I mean, there were cousins and all of my grandfather's sisters and their children, and sometimes their children's children and their wives, and it really was a big family house. And the bond that they share is different from, some of the bonds that I was able to create with cousins of mine, right? If we didn't live close to one another or, spend summers together, that's another thing that we lost, just that strong bond that my dad and his sisters and aunts and cousins, and, even though some of them lived in DC or in Atlanta now, they were really like brothers and sisters, even if they were second or third cousins. It really was a beautiful thing.
And our church, Western Baptist Church, kept us occupied. We had programs all the time. So I remember the Sunshine Band, the Sunday school, all kinds of activities to keep us occupied. One of the other differences that I see in neighborhoods today, and so many neighborhoods, the neighborhoods back then and so many neighborhoods today, is that our parents really parented. They really parented. They disciplined us. They didn't feel like they had to be our friends. They taught us actually how to live and how to be successful. And not only did our parents, but the whole neighborhood was a part of that. And I think back to when I was growing up, my father had a stroke when I was 10, and my mother took care of him at home for 5 years in a hospital bed. And people in my neighborhood made sure that I had the things that I needed. I remember Miss Etta Basden would always make sure that I got all of Dottie's clothes so that I would have nice things to wear to school. I remember how Mrs. Sadie Winston taught me how to be a nurse's aide. I was like 13 years old. She worked in the basement at Mcfadden Hospital. So that was my first job. And people just embraced, I know they embraced me because they knew that my mother could not work and we were of meager means at that time. Brookstown is still a part of my life and always will be. Another piece of history, y'all, my parents were the first couple that Reverend Graham, our pastor, married when he came to be the pastor of our church. And my husband and I were the last couple that he married before he died. I thought that was a very interesting kind of thing. I guess he said, enough has been done. Let me go on home.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
And most of Brookstown worked at the tobacco factories, the hospital, and at Duke.
That's right.
Mcpherson, when we were living in Brookstown, and Miss Sadie Winston was a nurse basically in the basement. That's if we went for tonsillectomy, that's where we had to go. We could not go in the other part of the hospital. We had to go to
That's right.
the hospital. That's the only place that we could go.
Yeah, I believe a couple of my relatives were born in that basement at Mcpherson Hospital. I know my great grandfather worked there.
Don't think they were born there. I think not at Mcpherson.
Well, the story I was told, and my dad isn't here to clarify for me. I think some of my aunties are in the chat, so they might be able to help me. But I think that a couple were actually born there, in spite of the fact that they were not actually allowed to be in the hospital, but in the basement. But I don't have my dad to verify. Maybe some of my aunts can jump in the chat and help me out. On this slide, though, you can actually zoom in and see. It's a little bit difficult to see on this slide, but 1, 2, 3 from the left is a photo of my great-grandfather when he went to retrieve the first eye transplant that was performed in the state of North Carolina for Dr. Mcpherson. As you see on the census listed there, he was an orderly at the hospital, and
Right.
the newspaper captured him picking that up from the airport. So it's pretty cool for me now to be able to go back and visit what is now Residence Inn in the Mcpherson Hospital, to see my great-granddad. I think that was probably the first photo I'd ever seen of him. Again, there are not a lot of pictures from that time.
And one thing, West Durham Baptist played a big part to the young people in the community because it was like a recreation center. You know, we had the first education building among the Black churches, I believe, in Durham.
That's
And,
right.
and then they would have movies for us in that building. Even the boys went and played basketball sometime. We had sleepovers in there and cookouts. So it was really a big part in the community.
And the nursery school, Barbara.
Yes.
You remember we had a nursery school. And
And
many of us were able to skip the first grade. I skipped the first grade because we met whatever credentials were needed for first grade students. So I went directly to the second grade to Miss Grant's class.
I know the YWCA also had programs there, and we want to note now, so when urban renewal came and, the city fathers decided that it was a good idea to destroy these communities, those churches and members of the community had to move. So the previous slide shows those churches, and the West Durham Baptist Church now is over in Southern Durham, as are many of the other churches. They've moved in. The Mount Olive AME Zion Church is now over on West Club Boulevard in the Walltown community. So all of those, there was a lot of disruption of people's lives and so forth during this process.
Dr. Johnson, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about what wasn't destroyed, right? And the clear difference. As you were showing me some of those historical maps, which this is my first time seeing those, right? And really the overlay was helpful for me because my whole life, it was hard for me to imagine where Brookstown was. And I see you have a picture of that exit on 147 that my dad used to drive us by. But when you showed that overlay, you showed Brookstown. I don't know if Laura wants to go all the way back there, but you showed Brookstown and then you showed the tobacco barn. There you go, right there, right?
Tobacco houses.
It's a pretty clear indication of the racist policy of urban renewal when you look at what wasn't destroyed and the clear intentionality of how they drew this highway, because what that tobacco barn survived, right? Everything at Trinity College or Duke University survived. Everything on the periphery in the predominantly white neighborhoods survived. So I suspect there was some justification used back in the day to do it, but it's a really clear racist attempt to destroy neighborhoods.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They called it Negro removal, right? So the idea behind it was to remove the quote unquote blighted spaces, right? But we have, as no fault of our own, really been put in a circumstance where we were poor people. So we were living in what they described as blighted communities, and then they came into those communities and disrupted them. There's a very interesting history that relates to that. But that overlay, you can see that. And again, Thackston and was right in the heart of the Brookstown community. And the major churches were there on Thackston or just off of it in the West Durham Baptist Church and the Mount Olive AME Zion Church, which was up at 123 Post Street and Thackston. But you're absolutely right, Joshua. That's an excellent point to make. What was missed, and it snakes all around. It curves to miss going through like Forest Hills, right? And it curves to go around Duke, but it went right through multiple African American communities.
Right.
And
ahead, Cora.
Charles,
Sorry.
when I was on, Dr. Johnson, when I was on the city council, there was a move to close Maxwell Avenue to the public. One of our Brookstown residents, Mary Frances Roberts, came to that meeting, and she spoke about Brookstown and our history. And of course, I joined in with her and reminded Duke that what they needed to do was not to build walls from the community, but build bridges. And sure enough, they had to leave Maxwell Avenue open to the public. People walk through there. I drive through there periodically, and and it is still open
But
to
Cora,
the public.
the most
But it's
interesting
open
thing-
because you understood its importance and you
Yes.
pushed to have it, and the community responded to your call.
but
Yeah.
Dr. John, during the
The,
time that they went through there, they
Go ahead,
still
Sister
made
Lassie.
those people sell those houses because there were several people on Furrow Street that wanted to keep their houses.
Mhm.
And yet across at the back, the tobacco warehouses, they didn't touch. And
Right.
they went right straight through. I still have a picture of my home right in front of the tall, I call it the stovepipe at Duke, but it's over at the heating plant. We live right by the heating plant, but
So
all of it is still there.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
and many
So
of those
after,
people did not get what they should have gotten when those homes were appraised.
That's
You know,
right.
I've interviewed people in the community who talk about literally just breaking down and crying over what they lost as a consequence
it's
of
a
that.
shame.
Yes.
It is.
Yes, it's hard. But see, Duke, even after the Thackstons' homes were moved and the other residents, they built this parking area and they put offices in the old tobacco place
Well,
and were just trying to keep us from coming through there.
mhm.
And here's the article here, Mary Roberts Hall to Durham City Council. That was 2008. And this is what she said. And fortunately, the city council agreed with us that it need to stay open. And I think I said to them, you know, when I die, I might just want to come back through Brookstown on Maxwell Avenue. And I don't want my funeral director to have to ask somebody, where's the key to this gate so I can get through. You have to, it pays to have God places angels where we need them. That's all I'll say. Otherwise, they didn't know about our history. Otherwise, it might be closed today to us.
They would not. And this is about the experiences of people. And I think this is really apropos. We're here now at the Gunn family. Joshua, you want to introduce your family to us a little more? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Another one of my favorite photos is of my great grandfather that everyone called Papa in our family, and I think one of those is either my grandfather or my Uncle Herb. I'm not sure which of the taller boys in the back, but everybody in Brookstown was family, so we'll undoubtedly say those folks are family to us. You see a newspaper clipping of my Aunt Phyllis, who was an accomplished student throughout her life. I think this is from when she was at Lyon Park School and won a medal. And then all of my aunts who are on this call watching us know the last picture on the right, which is the famous family portrait, my grandfather, Duck Gunn, and my grandmother, Daisy Gunn. And all of my dad's sisters, and my father stands in the middle. He is the only boy of 6 sisters, so everyone calls him Babe Bruh. Which is nobody calls him Henry unless my mom is trying to be proper in front of a bill collector or something. But we only call him Babe Bro, and everyone in the community knew him as that throughout his life, and really born out of the fact that he was the only boy. And then there's a great picture of my dad. We actually took Runaway, which is a clothing brand that Gabe Getz started along with a few other folks. And those in Durham may have seen the DURM shirts. Well, that is Runaway that created that brand. They decided to do what they call a Durham OG project. And we got to take them back to Brookstown, and they captured my father telling Brookstown stories. So there's a tiny bit of Brookstown that still exists off of Swift Avenue and Caswell Place. And we sat in front of one of the houses, and my dad told much better stories than you'll hear me tell. I mean, he was a walking historian.
Yes,
it was just so cool to hear him talk about how he grew up. And you see some of his best friends. That's Tommy Thompson and Clyde Thomas. One of his other best friends was Auntie Cora's brother, Leon, who they were childhood best friends. And they ended up passing away within 3 days of each other last year at the beginning of 2020. So it's hard for me to talk about, miss my dad very much. But at least we have experiences and pictures. And this is a great opportunity to honor him in this Brookstown discussion, because he was really passionate about it. And one other thing I'll say that me and my dad talked about before he passed is the fact that if we weren't having this discussion, if Miss Lassiter and Auntie Cora weren't here, most people in Durham wouldn't even know that Brookstown exists. There's no signage, there's no historical marker. And that's the same for a lot of Black neighborhoods in Durham. The most Brookstown has is a salad named after Brookstown at
we do. It's delicious too.
Great salad.
It better be.
But we deserve better. Our Black neighborhoods deserve better. And I hope the city will think about these community stories and put some historical markers in the places that we lost, so that future generations will know that there was a place called Brookstown and amazing people came from there.
Right.
I'm looking at this article that has precious memories and is referring to a quote from Miss Mary T. Horton, who was a member of West Durham Baptist Church. And she used to live on Thackston Avenue at one time, right, Barbara? But
Yes.
What is so amazing about the people in Brookstown, let me just share with you what Miss Horton did. Mrs. Horton paid for every piano lesson my brother Leon had. Every piano lesson. As a result of that, he became the student organist at Hillside. After that, he became an organist at West Durham Baptist Church. That is the caliber of people who lived or touched the lives of people in Brookstown. Just amazing. It almost brings tears to my eyes to think about the love and caring spirit that people from Brookstown had. And we had all kinds of entrepreneurs there. I remember, I don't know if you remember, Barbara, the days of the Asiatic flu.
Not really.
Yeah, you were probably traveling a lot because your husband was in the military, right?
Left Brookstown in 56.
Yeah, that's right. I had the Asiatic flu, and my mother decided to get a potion, a special potion for me from one of my neighbors. And she gave it to me, and when I woke up, I think that was my first ever hangover. But
well, we're up on excuse me, Cora. We're up on a point, I think, where we're going to take some questions from the audience. And Brother Joshua, I want you to know that your brother is out in the community with a recorder, interviewing as many of our people as we can to try to serve these stories. So the work that you are, calling for, we're doing that. And there's a lot of great work going on in Durham, but there's a lot more to be done. And you're absolutely right to ask for that.
Yes.
I appreciate you being out there, man, and capturing our stories. And it's needed and necessary. So many Brookstown folks are passing on, and we lost quite a few in 2020. And we need to make sure we capture these stories while these people are still living.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you
at this
all.
time, we're going to take questions. Yeah. Okay, Cheryl.
Yes, we have quite a few questions. So we would like to start with, was Thackston Street named after the Thackston family who resided in Brookstown?
I'm
Not-
gonna, I don't-
Yes, it was.
Not
It
to-
was. It's
I don't
named
think-
after Samuel. It was. It's named after Samuel Thackston, according
Who was
to Gene Bradley Anderson.
he?
Samuel
Okay.
Thackston actually came from Person County, and his people had come out of Halifax, Virginia. And his father is listed in the 1860 census as being an overseer. So they were a family of slaveholders. But
Yep.
Samuel Thackston.
And, okay,
That would likely mean that the Thackstons that we know, Marshall Thackston was going to be on this call with us, but that Thackston family, were they enslaved by that Samuel Thackston family, Brother Johnson, or was that Thackston family a family of Black overseers?
So we would, oh no, so the Thackstons I was speaking to were white.
Mhm.
And
Oh.
we'll have to have a conversation with Marshall about that, and that relationship. But I
Very
have
interesting- very interesting to hear
I
that.
have their genealogy for Thackston and for Jesse Brooks also, who is allegedly what Brookstown,
Brookstown is named
was
for, yeah.
named after, right?
Mhm.
And he too is from that same region. But I don't know why we missed having the famous basketball player Marshall Thackston on the panel today. I was out doing my research and saw that he was an outstanding athlete and coach, also, as
probably
well as a
on the
detective,
fishing
I
team.
believe.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was.
He's fishing.
Mr. Thackston is actually on as a participant today. He's been in the chat box, so you can
Oh,
give him
Okay,
a shout out.
good.
Hey,
good,
Marshall, what's
good.
up, man?
Hey, Marshall.
Marshall.
Another
Talk him up.
another
Josh,
Bull
I
City
thought
legend.
Maybe he was,
Mhm.
I thought maybe he was fishing or golfing today.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We're going to move on to the next question. Someone was asking the question, is this in the vicinity of Brightleaf Square? I guess they're not from Durham.
It's not too far. It's
right,
in walking distance.
yes, just a couple of blocks.
West of Brightleaf Square.
Mhm. Yes.
But
Okay.
I think a good landmark for those who are not from Durham to sort of orient yourself is the Hillcrest Retirement Center. Is sort of in the periphery of where Brookstown was. Really Swift Avenue, which turns into Broad, right, is right there as well. That should give you an idea. If you know where Hillcrest is, behind Hillcrest is a little bit of Brookstown that still remains.
And the Coca-Cola plant on Main Street,
Across from Mcpherson.
across from McPherson Hospital.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a lot of requests for the title for the book about urban renewal, Dr. Johnson. So if you could repeat that author's name,
Right.
please.
Yeah, that's actually really, really important. So Mindy Fully Love is actually a physician, and she was talking about what Joshua so astutely pointed out about the destruction of communities is it's about the disruption, of human lives and families and so forth. We tend to focus on the destruction of the buildings, but the title of the book is The Root Shock, and the author's name is Mindy Fully Love. And
Roots?
the root shock. And one of the things, and I'll just say the root shock, and what she's talking about is the displacement of communities, and she likens it to a tree. So if you take a tree, you can take a tree that's fully grown, and we know that we can, dig it up out of the earth and replant it somewhere. But when we do that, we cut the roots, which are its source of nourishment. And as a consequence, it stagnates and it takes time for it to sink roots again. And she's speaking to that process in terms of the experiences of African American people in the context of urban renewal, because once we were displaced, it took time for people to settle in, to form the bonds of community again. And even when they did, it was rearranged. You know, I don't, you all are here to hear from our panelists, but I will just say in my own family, for example, I didn't have the great benefit of growing up next to my relatives. My family had already moved, so I grew up around people who became fictive kinfolk, if you will. In the Black community, we're gonna make you family if you're not family, right? Through
That's right.
ties, right?
Yes,
I,
yes.
I got a lot of cousins, Dr. Johnson, that I'm not quite sure how we cousins, but we cousins, man. That's just how it
Mhm. Oh,
works.
right. We keep talking, we'll be cousins, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
All right, I got another
Mhm.
good question. Someone said that I noticed the Durham Freeway appeared to be irrationally just south directly into Brookstown. If the freeway had kept its expected path, would it have impacted Brookstown community in the same way?
I will just say I don't think so, but I think the greater point is that the highway missed the white areas and white communities, and it was very disruptive of Black communities. Again, if we started from the east, Hayti, and then after Hayti at Willard Street, you would get to the Bottoms. After the Bottoms, you get to Brookstown, and it just literally went right through Brookstown, right through the heart of Brookstown. And then, but beyond Brookstown, you get to Hickstown, and it went straight through it as well. And let me say this, for a long time, it stopped at Irwin Road. So it was a highway that went nowhere to me. I could never, as a youngster, I never understood it. You know, but when I analyzed it, it looked like as they were developing the Research Triangle Park, a quick way for folks at Duke to get out to RTP. They could hop on at Irwin Road and run
Mhm.
the East-West Expressway right out to RTP.
Yeah, it was your point about it being a highway that went to nowhere is relevant to me. I remember, now I know why, but my dad never took that road. We always took what he called the streets, right? We always went the slower streetways to get anywhere in Durham. And the first time I was on the Durham freeway was when a good friend of mine got his license before I did, and we were going to a recording studio in Raleigh, and it was the quick way to get to I-40. But I had no experience with that road, and I suspect it's because of the wounds that were so,
Mm-hmm.
the trauma of losing your community. My dad really never took 147 until probably the last few years of his life. And so as a kid, Dr. Johnson, I didn't even know it existed. Growing up in Durham, I never knew that Durham freeway existed until I was 16 and asked my father about it. And that's when I learned all these stories. And it was hard to believe that this happened, but knowing what I know now about the continued systemic erasure of Black people and Black communities, it gels really well with the history of this nation.
Yeah,
And
very
don't you
well
think,
said.
Yeah.
Johnson, by taking our church, that was the main portion of our community. When you think of
Yes.
West Durham and Mount Olive, when you take those two churches, that just took our community.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And as you said, Sister Lassiter, earlier about how important the church, it wasn't just a house of worship. Certainly that was its principal function,
Right.
but it was the community center. It was the meeting place. It was a place that helped to prepare the future generations of leaders. It was so important in so many different ways. And it is very disruptive when you pick up and move like that and you're forced to do it, you know. And what you were saying, Joshua, what you say about your dad and that hurt, it is shared, not obviously across Brookstown, across Durham, and across this country.
Yeah.
Sure. Were there other questions?
Thank you all. We do have more questions, but we're running out of time. So I want to ask one last question if I can. It's a two-part question. So one of the questions is, they wanted to know why Brookstown or where Brookstown got its name, and that it seems that, okay, go ahead.
Go on, Cheryl.
We wanted to know where Brookstown got its name. And then secondly, did Brookstown community members gain anything from the urban renewal?
You know, so let me take a swing at that, and then I'll let the community say. So the Brookstown name is comes from Jesse Brooks, who again had come to Durham. Uh, there were wealthy whites that moved into that area. The Black Knolls, there were a number of families. I don't want to get into all of that, but the name is alleged to have taken to come from Jesse Brooks. And I get that from Birch Coley talking about the history of Brookstown in the Carolina Times, which is an excellent source if you're trying to learn about that. And you can learn about Black Durham. That was our local Black newspaper. To the second part of the question, I'll let the residents is probably most appropriate, but I would just say generally, no, they did not. And oftentimes things were promised to people that were not delivered upon. So Black leaders who were being engaged about this process were duped in point of fact, oftentimes. And I could speak about that more in other places, but I want the community to be able to respond to that.
Yeah, I'll defer to Auntie Cora and Miss Lassiter in a sec, but I do want to point out that question is interesting. I think some of us assume that if you own a home and someone tells you they need to tear it down, you're going to get a big fat check and be able to live comfortably. But for marginalized people, specifically Black folks, that has never been the case. And it's happening on the peripheries of Durham right now. I have a friend who owns property in Apex, and their families own that property for generations. And when we met, she shared that the town of Apex was trying to annex their property or develop on their land. And I thought to myself, well, tell them no, you own that land, right? Yes. 3 or 4 years later, that development is happening. And so the point of that is, when they want the land, if you're not of a certain community and you don't have power or wealth to defend yourself, they will figure out a way to take it, and you'll be compensated very poorly.
You're correct, Josh. This is Barbara, because in 1918, my papa bought our house in Brookstown on Furrow Street. But Duke wanted the land. That's why we really had to sell it. And we didn't get but $3,000, didn't even get quite $3,000 for that house and land.
And you couldn't really put a monetary value on that home anyway, right? I mean, lives were lived there, families, children were raised there. I mean,
that's right.
Yes.
Cora, did you want to close us out, Cora?
Yeah, I had to make a run, but I'm back. Let me just thank, what I want to do is to thank Constance Stansel and the Neighborhood Improvement Services Department for this total project. It is good to have someone in a department head position who understands the importance of a history of Durham, because so many people come here and they're in leadership positions who don't even know Durham. They know where they live and that's it. So I thank Constance for her work, and Cheryl and Laura and Alexa and everybody else who helped with this. Brookstown was in closing, one of the values of living in Brookstown was the opportunity I had to go to Durham High my last year in high school, where I saw firsthand what racism really was. And I think that helped shape my life as well. This has been a blessed opportunity to talk about Brookstown, and I have so many fond memories, and I'm becoming teary-eyed because of that and all that happened in 2020. But God has really blessed our families and blessed each of us on this panel and those who are a part of this. And so I hope Constance can continue her work, and that we will look at electing people to office who go somewhere other than where they live.
I think that's an excellent way to close out. Laura, I see you've come back to us.
Can I add one other note? I know we're probably well over time, but for those who are watching this and hear the pain and frustration and hear about the history of racist policies in the city that we love, and a city that sometimes likes to convince itself that racism somehow covered the whole South and skipped over Durham.
No.
We this is our history, and this is still impacting our present. But for those who are watching, let's think about how we do two things: heal these wounds, repair the damage that was done, honor the individuals, people, and families, not just the famous ones or the celebrities, but the people who really built this community. Let's honor them and lift them up, and let's avoid making these same mistakes as our city continues to grow and develop.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Go ahead, Laura.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And that's a big challenge, but if anybody's going to do it, we are. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. As Ms. Mcfadden mentioned, thank you to all of the city staff who helped to put this together every month, and to our leadership, especially Ms. Sansel, for believing in this project and championing it and helping us to push it. And thank you to Dr. Johnson for joining us and moderating today, Ms. Lassiter, Mr. Gunn. We really appreciate your help.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And shout out to my aunts for doing it all over the country.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
having me.